This is a Full and Bloom interview with producer Randy Burns. Inside the album, Kreator, Extreme Aggression. More info at fullandbloom.com. How does Kreator come into your life?
They contacted my management company. I don't know how they did it, but they sought me out and got a hold of management. So I originally worked on Extreme Aggression in Germany. They asked me to come over there. Noise, they were on Noise Records, and the owner of that record company had a studio, and as part of their big facilities, they had a studio. And anyway, their idea was to bring me there so they wouldn't have to bring the band here. And I fought it a little, but they pressed me, and the management company pressed me, and so we went there and we started recording there. And I just didn't like the way it was coming out. You know, I wasn't comfortable in the room, and we've talked about this before, but I kind of had a methodology that involved renting drums and renting guitar amps and using, specific studios for tracking like Grinder. And I didn't have my Grinder, I didn't have my drum tech, I didn't have my rental drums. It just wasn't sounding great. So they weren't happy about it, but I convinced them to just bring the band to LA and let me do it the way I normally do it. And they did. So we started in Germany. I struggled over there, didn't like the way it sounded, wasn't able to get the sounds that I normally get, and eventually convinced Carl to send us all to LA, and we went and did it at Grinder. And then the usual overdub studios there. The methodology I had was really important to the sound. I'm sure I could have done it with a different drum tech and different rental drums and a different studio, but it just didn't work in that studio with what we had over there at the time.
Like we talked about in the Megadeth interview, you had like the drum doctor guy who came in and tuned the drums and all that.
We actually rented all the drums from him. He would create a kit that totally mirrored the kit that the drummer normally used. So whatever the drummer normally used, if he had double kicks and 2 floor toms and 3 rack toms, and then, whatever, 4 cymbals, 2 crashes, and 1 ride and whatever else, he would reproduce exactly the drum kit that they used, set up the way they used it. So when they sat down at it, it looked exactly like what they normally played. Again, the drums would be, the drums would sound fantastic as soon as you hit them. I mean, this guy was brilliant. He worked on every record in town too. I mean, the guy had like 6 bands and 6 different techs working for him. And they would have, he would personally go in and tweak, the drums on 3 or 4 of them, but he had a bunch of other guys that were out doing the same works. Sometimes, there would be some tech would come in and set everything up, and then he would come in to just tune the drums before we did the first take. I mean, he had a big business going.
It's such a tricky business, especially back then. Even tuning drums, I mean, just getting them to sound perfect, is no easy feat.
No, he was very, very good.
Would he match up tom sizes and everything? I mean, everything would be absolutely identical?
Not necessarily on the tom sizes. We would change those around a little bit occasionally. Nobody cared about that. Maybe have a broader range of toms than people usually had and things like that, just whatever sounded good. And snares, he would usually bring 3 or 4 snares. My favorites were, he had a Black Beauty. I don't remember who makes that, but it's a real popular name brand snare drum.
The Black Beauty is a Ludwig. Does that sound right?
Yeah, and it's a really, it's been a very popular, and if you go and look at drum samples, you're going to find that one in there. He had a couple of them that were really nice, and that was one. And then at the end, I used this piccolo snare he had. It was like maybe, most of them are like 4 or 5, maybe 6 inches deep, right? And then occasionally you see people have a really deep snare. It's like 8 inches deep. The snare was like 3 inches deep or 2.5 inches deep. It was a little higher pitched and had a really nice crack to it. And it worked really well for metal. And so anyway, he'd bring 2 or 3 snares, and we'd go through the snares, and we'd pick one to start with. And if we didn't really like it right away, we'd throw up a different one. And till, everybody and myself and the drum doctor and the drummer were all happy. Can we make a record?
Was he consistent, like, hey, I always put together a Gretsch kit, or is it varied or mimic the kit that the guy had?
He had a couple of different kits, but he generally did go with the toms were Gretsch, but the kicks and the snares were all different. And all of the toms, he took them apart and he described it hand beaded rims, so that surface of the rim was perfectly flat and level, and then he put it back together, and then you're able to tune it because it's a perfectly flat surface that you're pulling the skin over. That's what I remember him describing them as hand beaded, that, a lot of work went into making sure that each one of those drums was optimal, hand tuned, hand tweaked. We experimented a lot with kick drums and snare drums. The kick drums we ended up with were a little bit different. They were longer than usual and they were smaller diameter. I think they were 22s. They weren't twice the length of a normal kick drum, but they were 1.5 times the length of a normal kick drum, so they looked longer. We had good luck with those.
And I'm assuming the guys were always just thrilled to play on those kits. No complaints, right?
No, they liked it. A lot of times we'd have the guys would use their own pedals, so it would feel right, and would use their own hi-hat. It felt right to them. He was really good at making putting the kit exactly like the guys were used to doing it and helping them get comfortable in there. So, yeah, they got comfortable right away. And that was part of the reason it worked, is that he was able to do that. He was able to really simulate the environment that they were used to drumming in. When they sat down there, it felt like their kit.
How long are you guys in Germany for before you decide to bail out?
Like a month. But we didn't work all that time. There were a bunch of days where we didn't work, and they had in the studio there was a place for me to stay, an apartment. So it wasn't costing them a whole lot of money to have me there, just a little per diem, and we weren't working the whole time. But yeah, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks in the studio of really working, and again, we recorded some things, and I just wasn't really happy with it. I didn't like the way it sounded in the control room. I just couldn't adjust to it. It was really kind of a weakness on my part that I wasn't able to adapt to a different environment and do the same work in a different space with different stuff. But that's the way it went. We went back to LA and knocked it out in no time, and it came out really, really good. So the next record we did with them, we didn't even it was just assumed.
Right.
It was just assumed. And there were reasons why they really wanted me to go to Germany and not have them come here, because it's a big deal to get the visas, and it's complicated because they working or are they going on vacation? What are these guys doing over there? We even had some problems on the second record. They had a new guitar player and he had trouble getting his visa, and he showed up late, and the bass player had to go home early, and so there was some drama and some issues with visas and transportation and travel and just logistics. We worked it out.
Was that your first time overseas?
Well, it was my first time overseas making a record. I had visited, I'd spent a couple of weeks in Italy before. During that period, I did that work in Germany. I did a record in Australia. I did a record in Montreal. So I was traveling around quite a bit during that period in the late 80s.
So then what made those records different if you were traveling to other studios?
I just made do. But, the Kreator record.
Were those other releases not thrash?
No, one of them was. Actually, they both were. But they just weren't as big a bands. They weren't as big a budgets. I took some things with me on the one to Australia. Anyway, Kreator, that was a major band. They had more resources, and they specifically wanted me because they wanted that sound. They were looking for that, and they specifically wanted me. So I said, hey, my sound is here.
Right.
It's in LA. So
is this the first time you're getting points on a record?
Yeah, I think so.
I guess you're really kind of dealing with Noise, right, as a label, and
Correct.
then Epic is the distributor?
Right. We didn't have anything to do with Epic, just Noise.
Does that affect the budget as far as that delay? I mean, what's the overall budget for that record?
Well, yeah. It cost them 15, 20 grand to get me to Germany, and I guess the studio wasn't really any additional cost. They owned it. They lost whatever time they could have booked it, but
the band owned the studio?
The label owned the studio.
Oh, I gotcha.
So, sure, yeah, it cost them money. So, yeah, it was it was a difficult situation for the record company, but they started with this idea. They wanted to do it there, and I argued against it pretty strenuously, and then my management company said, look, just go try. And so I did, and I said, look, this isn't working. We got to go do it the way I want to do it. And they said, fine. And they were very happy with what they got.
So then the overall, if it cost 15 there, then what, you came back and probably got it done for about 20 or so?
Yeah, I think that's likely.
You guys go back to Music Grinder to record?
Yep. Went to Music Grinder, did the Drum Doctor. Pretty sure at that point we were using mostly Soldano amps. And Mille was definitely the guy with the green tube screamer, the Ibanez tube screamer sound. I just went and listened to it, and it jumped out at me. Like, yeah, he's one of the tube screamer guys. It was very, very popular sound to use the tube screamer overdrive with Marshalls or other high gain amps to get that. That was kind of the classic thrash sound. And
to me, this is the album where I thought it all came together. I mean, I know some hardcore Kreator fans, everybody's different. To me, this is where it came together. I loved this album and thought the songwriting, everything just was top notch. It was less technical maybe than their previous releases, but the one thing about Kreator are the classic riffs. They just come up with some really cool riffs. I'm just curious, did you familiarize yourself with like some of the previous stuff before you started working with them, like Pleasure to Kill? Or
I took a listen to it to see what they were like before I accepted the gig, and definitely wanted to do it because they were obviously a really good band. So, but I didn't spend a lot of time with it.
What was your first impression of them when you started working with them?
They were very good. The band is really built around Mille. He's the key. He does most of the writing, and he plays the guitar, and he sings. So, he's the center, and everything just revolves around him, and he's the most important personnel. But the first album in particular was they were very rehearsed, totally on it. Mille knew what he wanted to do. We did spend time working on solos on the first record. If I remember correctly, Mille did quite a few solos. He did less on the second record, on Coma of Souls. They had a new guy, and he gave the new guy a lot of the solo space. Frank
from Sodom.
Yeah, Frank came in, and Frank, he had some skill and some technique that Mille didn't have. Frank was, he was doing all of that, some finger tapping and playing fast and doing some more technical things, and he was very good. So Mille gave him the space. Mille had enough to do.
It did list him on this Extreme Aggression. It listed Frank as doing some lead work. However, on the next one, Coma of Souls, it says this is the first album he played on. Did he do any solo work on Extreme Aggression?
I don't think so. That's not how I remember it. I remember Frank was the new guy that showed up late. I think it was 89 when we did, or 90 when we did Coma of Souls.
So they're just cutting it as a three-piece on Extreme Aggression, correct?
Yeah, I think so. I think Mille, like I said, I think Mille did all the guitar work. I'd have to go look. There was Frank, if you're saying he's listed on there?
Well, it lists it at the bottom on the credits as the personnel.
And no other guitar player.
But talking about the production on Coma of Souls, it says this is the first album that Frank plays on.
Yeah. It seemed like there was another guitar player.
It said they, I think, had a falling out with a guitar player in Germany, maybe? Does that sound right? Maybe they were as a four-piece prior to coming over?
Let me take a quick look here. Look at something here. My recollection was there were 4 of them on both records. Indeed, there are. Frank on Coma of Souls. And who is it on Extreme Aggressions? That's not Frank. You look at Extreme Aggression, it's the guy on the far right.
Maybe Jord.
Yeah, there you go.
I couldn't say his last name, but
there you go.
Says that it almost seemed like they maybe had a falling out in Germany. Or did he come over too?
No, he came over.
Okay.
He was there.
Okay. So
Yeah. Mille didn't do all the guitar work, but Mille did more of it. And when we got to Coma of Souls, he delegated a lot of the solo work to Frank, who was very, very competent.
I did listen to the remaster. Now, often I don't like the remastered albums, but for Extreme Aggression, I thought it sounded phenomenal. Have you listened to it?
I didn't compare that one to the original, but I just listened to the original this morning. The original one, I like the way it sounds.
Coma of Souls, I didn't like the remaster version.
Correct. I compared those two, and I like the original one better.
Yeah, Extreme Aggression, they didn't mess it up and add too much high end. It's one of the few times they've actually done a fantastic job on mastering or remastering.
Well, half of the reason that those records sound great, there's the methodology and using the drum doctor and all that stuff, but it comes down to those guys playing the stuff really well. And Mille does the rhythm tracks, and he did a great job. I mean, he nails the stuff he plays. His double tracks are super tight. So when he comes into those riffs and those hooks, they just jump out at you because they're played so tight and with such precision. And the drummer is very, very good too. So, between those two guys, you get that's really a kind of precision that really makes it, they articulate things so well. And then it also sounds really great when they hit the slow parts because they're played again with a lot of precision and they're really tight.
Mille does all the rhythm tracks?
Yep.
You're basically working with the classic lineup of Kreator. Splinters off, I think, soon after. I think you do the next record with the same guys, but... Right.
The guitar player switched between those two. Like I said, I know Frank was new on Coma of Souls, and Frank, I think that other liner note, whatever that is incorrect. He did not appear on the first one.
Okay.
That was the other guy, Jorg or whatever. So, yeah. No, but the core band was good.
How would you describe Mille as a person at that time?
Well, we got along fine. He seemed reasonable and wasn't difficult to work with. He was, he's a pleasant sort of a guy, and he enjoyed being in the studio with his bandmates. They had a good time, so it was all pretty good. He was an agreeable, fairly pleasant guy who did his job well and was fairly easy to work with. He certainly wasn't difficult or troubling in any way. He's a nice guy. He was very focused and he worked hard and he was able to really get a lot done in a short period of time.
Was his English okay at that time?
Yeah, it was pretty good. I took some German in high school, so I tried to learn I tried to pick up a few phrases in German to use. Das ist nicht zu glauben was my favorite one, which is, this is not to be believed. That was one of the ones they use a lot. I picked up on it. I said, well, what is that one? What is that one? Oh, okay. So anyway, we had a little bit of fun with English and the German.
What's the atmosphere like in there? I mean, is there a party scene amongst those guys? They drink and smoke weed and kind of that stuff? I
don't think they smoked weed. They did drink some beer. They were pretty together. They didn't muck about. They were very businesslike. They were successful when I met them. They had already achieved a fairly decent amount of success, and they were responsible. Nothing wild or irresponsible about them. They were good guys. We did do some drinking when we weren't working.
I'm just wondering if anything's changed by this point. I think the production is just absolutely top notch. Is there anything that's changed from, say, your process? Like when we talked, we kind of broke down everything on our Megadeth interview of how you recorded the guitars or the drums or the bass. Is there anything that's changed in your process at this time, or is it pretty much you're sticking to the same?
No, but I think you're onto something. That I'd done a bunch of records and I was confident about what it was I wanted to do and the results I wanted to get. I didn't have my Neve console or my drum doctor or my Soldanos. I wasn't able to get the sounds that I was used to getting, So I had a bunch of those records under my belt. So yeah, I kind of felt like I went into that one. I knew exactly what I was going to do, and it did come together really well. I guess the point is that I had sort of refined things over time. I knew where I was going and what I was going to do to get those sounds.
Did you have any kind of process when you recorded your vocal tracks, or was yours just get up to the mic, blow it out, and then try to make it better, or we punch you in?
I would have them do the whole thing a few times, but I didn't have them do it top to bottom and then comp it. Occasionally, that would work out that way. Normally, I try to get one that was mostly good, and then if we had other tracks, then yeah, I would go look at the other tracks to see if the previous one had a good line there, and then otherwise we would go and take the best one and do some punching on it to try to get the final one. So it wasn't necessarily doing X mini and then comp it together, but I did pull things from multiple tracks occasionally. Usually I would just do a few until we got one that was pretty good, and then we go and fix that.
It also said that you took it to EQ Sound and then Cherokee. Are you doing overdubs, or where do you mix this album?
I think we mixed both of them at Grinder. I'm pretty sure both of those records were tracked and mixed at Grinder. We did overdubs at a number of different places. Again, the idea was to get a better deal, and I don't know why we would have been at Cherokee. I do remember going to Cherokee, though. I remember booking that place. But typically it would be a smaller studio. One of my favorites was Mad Dog Studio out in Venice. Dusty Wakeman ran that studio, and he's an engineer and a producer, and he's done a lot of stuff. He worked with Lucinda Williams, and he was on that Dwight Yoakam record too. He's done a lot of Americana stuff and some country stuff.
When you're mixing a record, say like Extreme Aggression, do you have some things that you like to do on mixes with the vocals and drums or guitars? I mean, what are you putting on those, and do you have any kind of classic moves that you do when you're mixing?
Well, I started using less reverb, and Extreme Aggression and Como Souls have less reverb on it, which is good. I did some sort of interesting things with guitar solos that were kind of Hendrixy, where I would send the guitar solo to a delay, and then you take the delay and put a chorus or a flanger or something on the delay, and then send that to a reverb. So you have all these different effects that are sort of in series, and it gets a real ethereal kind of solo sound. But
very cool.
We were doing the usual stuff. I just listened to the Como Souls and jumped out at me as the Lexicon PCM reverbs. The gated reverb on the snare, it's a Lexicon PCM 60 or something, Anyway, they were very popular at the time. This sort of low-end Lexicon rack-mounted reverb, but that gated sound was on a lot of stuff. A couple of different reverbs on the snare, and like I said, when I got to Extreme Aggression, I was trying to use a lot less reverb, and that helped with the sound, tighten the sound up. That's one of the reasons that I think it sounds good. It's just we learn over time. With this really fast stuff, it's just better if you try to avoid it.
I can always remember Kerry King when they did Rain and Blood. He was like, that was the first time I realized you didn't have to use reverb.
Right. Right.
It's kind of like those 80s keyboards, they just ruin everything to me. Even when I go back and I listen to Pink Floyd, the 80s records, there's some decent songs on there. But when I get to their 80s stuff, those fucking keyboards, man, it just kind of totally time stamps it.
It's the DX7 or it's a Jupiter 5 or whatever, They had those.
Did you have any favorite compressors you used typically on the mix?
Pretty much it was always 1176s in LA2A which were standard fare in the studio. Those are the ones that they use on everything else. When I would track vocals and I would track bass, I would usually try to run them through the LA2A and just barely touch it and just get a tiny bit of compression to tape. And the same thing on the bass recording. I didn't use a lot of compression. The one thing that I'm looking for now that it just occurred to me this morning when I threw up, when I was listening to the Kreator, just to check it out before I came here. By the way, those two records do sound really good compared to just about everything else. In my opinion, I really like the sound of both of those records. And Extreme Aggression I like a little better because it's a little more aggressive just in general. So I prefer that sound, although the other one is it's just different. It's a little slicker. It's a little more produced. But the one thing that I don't have in the box mixing yet is a good emulation of that Neve EQ on that Neve console they had at the Music Grinder. I'm actually going to go, and I know I'm Facebook friends with the owner of the studio and another engineer, Robert Feist, who was also a staff at Music Grinder for a long time. And I know Robert ended up with a couple of those Neve modules in a little rack mount that he carried around with him to other studios, so he could, kind of have that sound. Oh yeah. A lot of engineers have that. They have a little thing they bring in. It's got some preamps in it. At Music Grinder, Stevie Nicks used to come in once in a while, and her engineer would come in, and he had his own little set of API preamps and some other stuff in a little rack that he would set up on the console. And then she used an odd microphone for tracking vocals. She used a 441, Sennheiser 441, which is a dynamic mic. Right. It's long and square. It looks funny too. Oh, I've seen them, yeah. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. And she would use that, and then they would run it through this API preamp and EQ, and it didn't matter where she recorded. She had the same signal chain. That mic, that preamp into the tape machine, so it didn't matter where she recorded. So anyway, a lot of guys had that. Anyway, I'm sorry, No, I love this kind of shit. He's got he got a couple of those Neve modules from that he had in this external portable little unit. So I want to get a picture of it. I'm trying to remember exactly what they are. I think there's something with a 73 in it, and a couple of people have emulated it now. The 1073? Yeah. The console was older, and it was custom. It's not a standard, but I think that's the EQ. So anyway, I'm going to get one of them to get me a picture of that EQ module, and I'm going to go and search again for somebody that's put together the same sound, because we used to use a lot of additive EQ on the guitars, and it's the kind of thing that's not really, a lot of people will say you shouldn't do. But on some of the guitars, sometimes we would turn all the knobs on the EQ. We turn up the treble and the bass and the mids and the high mids and the low mids, and we turn them all up, and it would just make a very cool sound. Those input modules could drive them really hard. There's a line in that Sound City thing where Rupert Neve is talking about his transformers and the way he builds his modules and preamps. Make them distort. That sounds very sweet. We used to do that. And Dave Grohl's looking real confused at that time. They kind of panned to him. Right. He didn't understand all that. But the bottom line is you hit this thing really hard and it distorts. It sounds good. It's very sweet sounding is what Rupert Neve said. You can take his console, you can take his EQ and hit it really hard and turn the knobs up really high and do a lot of EQ and overdrive the thing, and it makes its own kind of non-linear distortion that sounds really good. Now, of course, they know all about this now, and everybody talks about it now, but I haven't heard one that actually emulates it the way I remember. Uh-huh. And you've tried all the UA Neve ones? Well, I need to go back and look. I've got one of those. Even on my podcast, I use the 1081 as the EQ typically, unless I have to EQ more or I can't find something or it's sounding like shit. So you're very familiar with this?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, that was the thing that we did. You know, if you want to talk about something we did with the equipment, with the console, with a specific piece of gear, the EQ on that old Neve sounded good when you turn the knobs really far, like, you know, just adding, you know, turn the knobs most of the way, right?
Right, and you're talking like the low, the low, mid, and high.
Yeah,
most of the way.
Turn all of them.
Right.
And so it would end up there. And you drive them really hard. It would make a very cool sound. When I threw up that Kreator stuff today and listened to the guitar sound, it's like I haven't been able to make that exact guitar sound, or it hasn't felt exactly right to me. And I think that's what's missing is I need that Neve on the end of it.
Yeah.
I need that Neve distortion on top of the guitar sound. So anyway, I'm going to look into that, because that's one thing that we did then that I think is part of the sound. I think that's part of I think that's on a bunch of those records. That part of the guitar sound is that Neve console distorting a little bit.
Do you mind saying what kind of point structure you got on this album?
I got 3 points on both records.
Nice.
And I think they owe me money. They were sending me royalty statements at the beginning, and then I moved away from Hollywood, and then they just stopped coming. And I didn't think about it again. I got involved with raising my kids and a different life, and I didn't think about it. But recently, the last few years, I went back and looked, and it was like, those records sold really well. So I'm going to look into finding out if they actually owe me some royalties. I think that, you know,
my God, they
made money on those records.
They have.
Yeah, I
They'd
think
have
so.
to, especially if they haven't. You're talking about they haven't paid out since the 90s?
Right.
Holy crap. I mean, they would definitely owe you some money. That supposedly this one, Extreme Aggression, was their best seller in the States.
Yeah, and they sold really well in Europe too. So
of course, yeah. No, of course.
Yeah, so anyway, I'm going to, I don't know if you want to mention that or not, but I'm going to pursue their current record company and find out if we can see if the band actually owes me some money. I think they do.
And anything stand out? I know typically you don't really remember too much about the individual songs. Anything with Betrayer or any song that you remember anything about?
No, not particular.
Okay.
The title track I thought was, you know,
Extreme
was a
Aggression.
standout. Yeah, and I just went and looked at their Spotify, and Extreme Aggression is in the top 5 songs on their Spotify list. So.
Oh, it'd have to.
You know.
This is where I thought they peaked. I loved Coma of Souls as well, but I thought as far as everything, the production, the songwriting, I thought this was a brilliant record.
It's very good. I'm very happy with Extreme Aggression. I think that's like one of the best things. One of the better things I did.